Hello everyone, my name is Karani. We start a new cycle of lectures. The topic is relationship between men and women from a position of yoga. Similar lectures on this subject were given a very long time ago. I can even say that they were probably always read, probably, according to some information. The topic has always been relevant. The last such lecture cycle was also some years ago, long enough. Since then, much has changed, but no change in the basic theory, because people are the same, the problems are the same, problem standards, situations, patterns of behavior are the same, the mind is the same, although some people develop their mind with a great success, someone with less. But anyway, some kind of progress is going, living conditions around are changing, something is becoming easier, something is becoming more complicated. Therefore, there is a need to raise this topic from time to time. I answer the question why I'm doing all this here, just to draw the attention of those who are interested in this topic and who have appropriate prehistory practice associations to hear all this. As a rule, this problem is heard and is relevant for everyone, but there is a reason why it very often stays in the blind zone. So, as a rule, it is decided last. It's not solved at all, but it is believed that it should happen all by itself, and that's how it will happen. It should happen. This is also a very promising and profitable strategy for some of our internal structures, the existence of which many are almost do not guess. In fact, if we are talking about such a concept as a man and women from the position of yoga, then we have to create a general conceptual system. It is already available for those who study in the appropriate yoga schools, which firstly recognize the authority of the Vedas and secondly recognize the classical treatises such as the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, Shiva Samhita, Hatha Yoga Pratipika, which came from tantric sources. The Vedas say nothing about the chakra system, as I know. All practical exercises in yoga came from tantric sources. The question is, are we now returning to the origins or are we deriving something from there? Even if you started with Hatha Yoga, it's wonderful, but if we practice conventional classical types of yoga, sooner or later we come to the topic of relationship between men and women and return to the source from which it all came out. It is not taken out of the blue. To be honest, it is difficult to study yoga without this at all. If we practice yoga is yoga, if we and not as fitness just to make the body more elastic and the brain more relaxed. If you allow ourselves to go further and further in yoga, if we go to the level of some internal structure sensation, if we do not limit ourselves, do not force but allow processes to occur, if we do this and understand that we are do it honestly and we know why we do it, then sooner or later the yoga system itself is made so that by practicing some exercises, some asanas at the pranic level rises, the amount of vitality becomes greater, the worldview becomes wider, some things are becoming clearer, there are fewer blind spots. In particular, the topic of relations between men and women begins slowly to creep out of the blind zone. What do I mean when I say that it begins to creep out of the blind zone? It is clear that any mature person is interested in this topic. It is clear. It is clear even without yoga. It is interesting to everyone. Anyway, someone may be silent on this topic. Someone may be more interested, someone less. But one way or another, it does not bypass anyone. I'm talking a little bit about other things now. I mean that we start doubting those things that were previously solid for us before. What do we know? As a rule, some elementary sexual education people have from childhood, some has it from parents, others from porn magazines and films, some from older friends, depending on your fortune. Earlier or later, everyone gets this education. Usually, first impressions are very strong, at least if we speak about one human life. If we consider a period of several lives, it is more interesting and more fun. From the position of yoga, it is useless to consider it exclusively during one life. I know it's perfectly well that psychology scientists consider life as a period from the moment when a person was born. There are also different theories about intrauterine development. Well, from the moment of conception to the time of death. Yoga looks wide. Yoga considers and works with a period of several lives. According to the theory of yoga, we live not one life. We evolve and develop over many lives, changing bodies. These bodies are also improving, but we will talk about this a little bit later. Now let's talk at least the period of our current life. Somehow we gain information in this topic. As a rule, what was first of all creatures the strongest impression, even just at the memory level? What do you remember immediately when you hear genitals? What pops out in your head? To each their own. Someone recalls their own. Someone has a mind picture from a textbook. Someone has a picture from a porn movie. Such examples can be given as many as you want. There are a uniquely formed association, associative relations. Basically, we are thinking with these associations. We pull out the necessary ones. Do not use the unnecessary ones. We work with them somehow. Sometimes this happens consciously, sometimes absolutely unconsciously. We think that we know something and think that we understand something. What I'm getting at. Even in science, which I do not even want to touch, they do a lot of things, especially recently. Some pretend that they do a lot, some do the same as in all areas of life. A lot became known that was not previously known. Therefore, even if we take some specialized textbooks, for example, a biology textbook for ninth grade, many things are not described there. If you take some popular science literature now on the subject of human reproduction, then you will learn much more from there than from a regular textbook that was written in 80s, 90s, depending on who studied when. We always discover something new, but the old data remains in our head. If we knowingly do not focus on the specific topic, if we knowingly do not grow in it, then we do not take it critically. What we have in our head, it goes with us in life. By the way, this raises the question of perversions and deviations. Usually what was once presented to us as a perversion and deviation, or we decided so by ourselves, we keep it in our mind. As a rule, do not look into some topic that we have to put on the taboo rank. Why? Firstly, we have not enough vitality. It is impossible to study everything at the same time. There are a lot of types of yoga. It is clear we want to develop immediately in all types of yoga. We want to know everything. I know that very well, but this doesn't happen. Therefore, in some yoga schools, it is recommended to choose a specialization to have general line of development and to get everything else gradually. It is believed that this approach is the most effective. As for me, from the beginning, I came from Tantra Yoga theme, relations between men and women. In the beginning, I did not have axiomatics of yoga lecture, but lectures of Tantra Yoga. Axiomatics of yoga and everything else were later. I came from this topic, and from the very beginning, I knew in what I was interested in and in what I want to develop. Therefore, I have no doubts about this.
Просто жизненных сил на все, изучать все и сразу невозможно. Видов йоги очень много, развиваться хочется сразу во всех направлениях, я это прекрасно знаю. Когда ты узнаешь, что этих видов йоги очень много, тебе, конечно же, хочется сразу узнать все, но так не бывает. Поэтому в некоторых школах рекомендуют выбрать специализацию и все остальное добирать постепенно, но иметь какую-то генеральную линию своего развития, то есть, считается, что это наиболее эффективно. Ну так вот, что касается меня, я изначально пришла с темы тантра-йоги, отношений мужчины и женщины. В общем-то, вначале были не лекции по аксиоматике, а именно лекции по тантра-йоге, и потом уже была аксиоматика и все.
The more I study the topic, the more interesting it becomes to be. The more I understand that we know so little. Actually, I am also not a great specialist in anything. I'm not an Orientalist by education. I'm a lawyer by education. I'm not a scientist. I do not sit in laboratories. I do not study myself what is happening. I try to be aware of what science does in this subject and what it discovers, but then you listen to the opinion of some other experts from the same official science and they heatedly refute the achievements of their colleagues. They say that they are just trying to get out the next subsidy. These disputes constantly happen even in the world of science. Engineers say that artificial intelligence is already here. Hello, here is a future, robots will replace humans soon. Indeed, soon. There will be less work for living people than for machines and computers. Scientists who deal with brain problems say that this is all nonsense, that it is impossible to replace natural intelligence with artificial. This is all completely heresy and exists exclusively to get out state subsidies, grants, and other things. This is happening right now. In this huge amount of information, it is impossible to find any unquestioned authority because it all depends on our personal relation. We return to what we rely on. This is a question of a general conceptual base. We cannot rely at the moment on official science. Science doesn't accept the concept of reincarnation and rebirth. We cannot rely on any religious system. Whoever believes that all yoga is exclusively in Hinduism, I strongly disagree with this. If only because part of yogis is preserved in Tantric Buddhism. Also, 6 yogas of Naropa, there are not so many information about them in Hinduism. That is, at least 2 world religions are related to yoga. If we take the Sufis, we add the 3rd religion which is related to yoga. Therefore, it is not entirely accurate to take some kind of religion and say that we can rely on it. On the other hand, this topic is everywhere, somewhere in a more explicit form, somewhere in a more veiled form. It depends on culture and society which time, religion, or science developed. Recently, I have read an interesting story about where the myth of male polygamy and female monogamy came from. You won't believe it, but as some sources tell, it all started with the fact that biologists got into this problem. One of the scientists watched the flies of Drosophila. They appear on the fruit. Cute, harmless little flies. It is not clear why and by what logical reasons this was transferred to people. Sometimes it happened. Therefore, it cannot be said that there is a single source which says what is correct. Perhaps the only thing that needs to be observed in all topics, including the topic of male and female interaction, it is criminal code. Everything that contradicts criminal code is forbidden and is perversions, a crime, and so on. If we are talking about yoga, then this is 3 principles of yoga violation: the principle of kindness, the principle of common sense, and the principle of helping all living beings to refuse suffering. We should also refuse sufferings ourselves. All yoga teaches, one way or another, approach what is absolutely necessary when teaching yoga, to take a vow of refusing suffering. But now is not about that. We are not about teaching yoga at all. We talk that there is certain principles and everything that violates them is considered unacceptable and do not considered yoga. So it is not in the sphere of my personal research and thinking, because it is not interesting really. Anything that violates the principle of yoga is not interesting for me. Maybe there are other systems what it's interesting, or just to know what is it, but it's not no sense to start, because by doing harm to others you will not achieve much. Acting not optimally, not efficiently, spending yourself on everything at once is none most like you will not achieve the result. Without helping others focus on yourself, you will be left alone. That's why these lectures exist. This lecture cycle are periodically told from year to year, because I know I came, as I said, from these lectures to the yoga school. I have been in yoga for a long time, since I was 16. I came to yoga school only because of these lectures. Only I was sure that any yoga school is definitely a marginal sect, that there is nothing to do and it is dangerous. I had such prejudice. Only lectures of men and women relationship initially dispelled my fears, at least a little, then already furthermore. I began to find out and understood that yoga is a system that increases people's freedom but doesn't violate them, it unlike sects. The fundamental difference is just in that. If you feel free and become better, then this is yoga. This is yoga for you, this is your path. If it gets worse, you feel that you are being squeezed from all sides, then it's either sect or it's not your path. There is nothing unambiguous in this world. In yoga, there is no definitely bad or definitely good. There are principles of yoga and there is something that violates them and does not violate them. What violates them is not yoga, but what does not violate them, it is, plus different additional conditions that can be considered as yoga for a particular person. The reference system in yoga is a person. We repel from it. We return to how to form a general conceptual base, taking into consideration all these complex moments. Each has its own authority. Someone used to rely just on textbooks. Someone used to rely on popular science literature. Someone used to rely on scientific literature who is available. Someone is religions on religious sources, considering them the only source of yoga, someone else on something else. When they are these rigidly formed associative connections, it is very difficult to allow anything else beside into your universe. It is especially difficult without destroying the old to attract something new and trust it. Trust is necessary, no faith needed. In yoga, no one is pushing anyone to believe in anything, but you need a minimum credit to trust in order to start checking. Yoga calls to check every position of yoga with your personal practice, your personal experience. But in order to check, you need to try. In order to try, you need at least some kind of trust. Here, curiosity is not a vice. Curiosity is a wonderful thing. If you listen to these lectures just because you are interested in it, is good. Who knows what life will bring? It all works really, really interesting. First we listen, interpreting in some way. This is natural. What I say is all stupidity from me, all wisdom from yoga teachers. If, in your opinion, I'm talking nonsense, then consider Karani is a little crazy. Today, either, always, or simply we have different paths, it happens. It is also difficult to find a person whom you will listen and not be annoyed. Therefore, if I annoy you, then you just need to look for the other lectures and everything will be fine. If you find in my speech something right, wise, that responds to you, that you know that this is the knowledge of yoga that is transmitted for living people for living people. It can be obtained using this minimum credit of trust. You can give it, but you cannot take. You cannot give it, but you can take it. You cannot teach yoga, but you can learn it. This is how it all works. Therefore, how deeply to absorb knowledge regarding to interaction of men and women from the position of yoga, it is the business of everyone who will listen to these lectures, if someone will listen, of course. Now the basic concepts of yoga. The reference system in yoga is a person. What is a person is difficult to define. Each has its own. Scientists have their own. Religious people have their own. People with some absolutely separate worldview, they have their own. It can be interpreted as you like. In yoga, a person is a very complex structure that is revived by so-called higher self. There is many definitions in Sanskrit. I will not even try to tell them now. Who knows, they know. Who needs, you will find. In this world ruled by the law of cause and effect, it is the law of karma. In this world, we have specific manifestations. Our grossest manifestation is our physical body, which we all have. We can hardly say that we are people if we do not have a physical body. The body is responsible for so many things that cause our behavior in relation to other people, including our interpretations. A lot of different interesting things are inside our body. By the very fact that we were born in the human body, we by default already accept some rules of the game, which in part reduce our freedom, or on the other hand, they increase our freedom.
И есть конкретные проявления в этом мире. В этом мире правит которым закон причины и следствия, он же закон кармы. В этом мире есть у нас конкретные проявления. Самое грубое из них – это наше физическое тело, которое у нас у всех есть. И мы, собственно, едва ли можем сказать, что мы люди, если у нас этого физического тела нет. То есть для того, чтобы считать себя человеком, тело должно быть. И именно телом обусловлены очень многие моменты, которые так или иначе в дальнейшем строят наше поведение в отношении других людей.
Very often I come across question, well, why is everything so complicated in the relation between a man and a woman? Even the human body is very complex in comparison with some infusoria, or even with the black fly Drosophila. Read about this behavior of these flies. There is still some fun between the female and male Drosophila flies. They have their own system. Even in primitive bodies where is intersexual reproduction, everything is not easy. And what we can say about the human body, it is believed that every tiny structure in our body is alive. Somehow all our cells interact with each other, all our internal organs with each other. That is, it is a system that works very clearly and harmoniously. Besides all this, we have our brain. It is the organ through which our mind shines, through which the mind manifests itself and works. The interaction of the brain with the rest of the body system is extremely difficult. Read on this topic modern researches, it is very interesting. Regarding high nervous activity and all these moments, I will not retell is simply because there are people who do much better and more proficiently. but for general development it would be very good to know this. Indeed interesting, useful to know how this all works. A lot has been written about how hormonal system works. There is a lot of information, but nevertheless, until now, nobody knows it. No adequate scientist will ever tell you that he fully understands how it works. This is hardly a very complex internal structure. As yoga teaches us, there is a settled point. A gross body is, strictly speaking, a settled body which accumulated some kind of material structures. There are streams of pranas, streams of energies inside. Prana is, frankly speaking, a mixture of energy and consciousness. They are functioning. One affects the other, that is, gross affects the settle, settle affects the gross. In getting an imprint on one, we act on another. It happens all the time, therefore, from here, such phenomena as psychosomatics and so on, there is a clear correlation. You can believe you can, not to believe you can check it. There are such settled points we need to know about. If we are talking about a general conceptual base, the first is that the gross manifestations of human, there are settled manifestations of human, and there is still such an interesting group as settled bodies. Man has three groups of bodies. The settled body is a very complex structure. Looking ahead, I will say this is what at the time of death dissolves last. This is where the strongest impressions can be stored. The settled body, least amenable to analysis of the mind, least amenable to even awareness. I hope that I use common terms. If not, please correct me and write. I will tell again. So-called mindfulness, it is of course wonderful, but it is not only some constructed lines of behavior. It means also that at every moment of time we can be aware of what is happening in our body, in our mind, in the world outside. At the same time, all this is interpreted and a lot of complex processes are going on. How we can manage this perhaps also depends on our practice of yoga and how we work on ourselves. How interesting is this to us, first of all, and how much attention we direct to it. If we work on ourselves and begin to direct our attention to this, then gradually more and more inevitably we begin to doubt about those impressions in those associative connections that were once developed. If we consider the period of human life, then in childhood, then adolescence, when the basic foundation is laid out about what a boy is and what a girl is and what is the difference between them. The same if we are considering the period of several human lives. Some specific cliches of behavior stereotypical. The first is due to the fact that we already have a human body, what is laid in it by default as said. The second is what gender we embodied in this life. A lot also depends on this. The third, it is some kind of ready scripts that are formed under the influence of society, where we were brought up, including our sexual education, intersexual interaction, even non-verbal. We see what kind of relationship dad and mom have. Do these parents even exist? And what is happening in society on this subject? This also affects us while we grow. It is within one life. There are many other points. This is indeed a very complex system. Some of these scenarios seem to be sealed and registered, including our settled structures. We may not be aware of them. At some point, under the influence of certain mechanism, they turn on and begin to play. Most often, we do not even realize them. We cannot understand that some kind of stereotypical scenario of behavior has now switched on, and we are talking and we are following it like a clockwork. It seems to us that this is something else. Why it happens? There are reasons for this. Firstly, of hormonal system fills everything with hormones, and we look at the whole world in rose-colored glasses. Of course, if procreation depends on this, whether you like it or not, all our problems, all our joys and sorrows in the relationship between men and women are focused to continue life, to continuation of the family, the birth of children, because otherwise it is big question how it would be without these mechanisms. Of course, it seems to us that this is a very primitive way of thinking. Sometimes There is such an opinion. I do not want children. Respectively, my interest in the opposite sex is no way connected with procreation. It is a delusion. I think this is also a certain scenario that is being played out so that sooner or later children appears. Of course, if we do not rudely interfere in these processes, and you cannot interfere roughly with this system. We will talk about this later. As yoga teaches, a person has several levels of bodies and internal structures in addition to the physical body itself with all its hormonal, nervous system, the brain, and other interesting things. About how they function, it outlined described it in all tantric texts, tantric treatises. In this material, where the system of chakras and channels of nadi described, one can meet at least some information about that, at least something to understand how it happens. As for some settled moments, there is either absolutely nothing on this topic or some vague references or completely closed sections because it is generally very dangerous to intervene.
О том, как они функционируют, плюс-минус, в общих чертах описано во всех тантрических текстах, тантрических трактатах, там, где есть система чакр и каналов нади, там можно встретить об этом информацию хоть какую-то, хоть что-то примерно понять из этого, как это происходит.
What is the system? These are our previous wills. In fact, it is made in such a way as to give us the best of what we deserve. The universe is good to us. We will express something, and our wills are always embodied, but at the same time, they are embodied with minimal harm, at least to ourselves. The universe is humane to us, unlike the way we treat the universe sometimes. A human is such an interesting knitting doll from several groups of bodies, the presence of which we cannot even check and touch, but we can track them by the action of some mechanism, by some indirect signs. In addition, this whole nesting doll is assembled at birth and disassembled at the time of death. Here is difficulty. In one life period, there is already enough information that there is something that we do not feel. There is something that affects everything, including the relationship between the sexes, like a house of cards. With every new birth and every new death, it is assembled and disassembled. When the highest self incarnates, all this begins to assemble as a Lego kit. As an example, when a child makes a toy man from Lego and then breaks it into small parts, the body either decomposes, turns into a set for some nutrients, for some toxic substances, or we burn it and get ashes. Something remains of this as rule, rarely does not dissolve into nowhere. Besides, on the subtle plane, the same dissolution occurs, but we have this information just from people who practiced yoga and who realized yoga in the moment of their death. They know what is going on there. If we talk about ordinary people who have not been there, nothing happens. So the man died, the physical body decomposed, that was all over. Therefore, it is more difficult. On the other hand, it is easier. Using the concept of rebirth, reincarnation, birth and death, we can already understand that there was some initial foundation. We are already embodied in this body, having some tendencies. In order to unravel them, it is not enough for us to use just psychology methods to work out our childhood or some intrauterine injuries, if any. We have to rewind even further back. But you don't need to remember your past lives. No one requires us to go to the level where we can see all our past and future lives to work with intersexual interaction problems. No need to go back there and unravel there, or at least understand where it came from. There are indirect signs, they definitely are. For example, talents can be considered from the same position. If a person has a talent, a tendency to something, then most likely he has something this already once. This is once there was some experience. On the other hand, there are people who have a poorly developed mind. It is difficult for them to live in society. They are good, kind, loyal friends, but complex psychological games and dilemmas are difficult for them. Perhaps they live in the human body not so long. Yoga declares that the evolution of consciousness and evolution of bodies has been and continues to be in parallel ways. For some number of lives, and we lived in the bodies of primitive animals, and then at some point already evolutionary jump to the next step into the human body. It is clear that if we just got a human body, then several lives, maybe several hundred lives, maybe several million lives, I don't know what number of measure we will get used to it, so to speak, we will adapt. We will drag some patterns of behavior from the bodies of animals. In animals' bodies, as we know from programs such as The World of Animals, each type of animals has their own type of intergender interaction, but as rule, it is only meaning of fertilization and reproduction. There is not much difference with humanity. But we made up that sex is separate and the birth of children is separate. But these two things are very close and it makes sense. If they were completely unconnected, we would all have died out already. Another conversation is that when we evolve, develop and live a large number of lives in people's bodies, we begin to practice yoga. We begin to understand that everything is a little more complicated than just the level of the bodies, the level of hormones and the nervous system. We begin to understand and feel, perhaps through and thanks to our practice, that there is internal flows of energy. We feel some kind of interaction outside besides what we can see and feel, that this is all a very complex system that somehow functions. At this very moment, we can already talk about how to deal with these problems from the position of yoga. Until this time, most likely, it will be both not clear and not interesting and not necessary. If there is such an interest, then we begin to understand that we can also work with this. But we are so interested and we think that we are ready to follow the path of this particular yoga, the yoga of interaction between a man and a woman, and then we must be aware of how ready we are to change ourselves and develop rapidly, because it is a very fast way. This is one of the fastest ways in yoga, but for this you may need to sacrifice your egoism and it will be required. It is not that simple. I just explained the situation from the most primitive, from the moment when we just get the human body developed, work. At some point we can to the knowledge of yoga and discover it for ourselves. We begin to understand how everything is arranged. That is, we are getting closer to the source. At some point, gaining prana, we begin to extract the interaction of man and woman from our blind zone. From the level of a biology textbook for ninth grades, we come to the level of understanding. Where is yoga, where is prana, where is the interaction of people, including these subtle levels and everything else that is connected with this. At this moment, indeed, further we understand whether we want to go this way and whether we are ready to change our whole life, all our patterns, all our habits, to walk even with the territory that is hard-coded by our instincts, or we are not ready to do it. While we believe that it is too early for us, we are just listening, we are just curious, and we should practice Hatha Yoga for some more lives. By the way, there is a difficulty with Hatha Yoga. Practicing Hatha Yoga, it will not possible to avoid the topic of interaction of men and women, because yoga gives the excess of prana resource. And where does it go? First of all, of course, there in the area to which all our internal structures, our entire evolution are more tuned. What is this? This is reproduction. So, again, we came to this topic. Practicing yoga, we cannot avoid this topic. The only question is how much we are ready to work with it, or we are not ready, or we are ready just to quietly direct our attention to this area and we live a specific life in the blind zone with its specific interaction of men and women. That is, we work in one thing but do not work in something else. This, of course, is also possible for a fairly large group of people. This is a scenario that happens all the time. The only question is how much we are ready to change this. People who practice Tantra Yoga, it is the path of Virabhava. This is called Virasadhana. Path is very difficult. This is the path for heroes because it will require to give up egoism and a lot of things to reconsider in our behavior. The more you get, the higher is your responsibility. It always has been. Therefore, here Here we will consider some specific issues, some specific examples from life. We will try to give comments on how this could be from yoga position and so on. Please write your questions and possibly descriptions of some life situation that you think are either strange or typical, or you want some comments on these situations. Please email to asktantrayoga@gmail.com. We will discuss in these lectures to make it clearer. It's always more interesting when there are examples from life and when these examples are discussed to the things we consider in lectures.
хочу, не хочу и в прочих вещах. То есть кому многое дано, с того и спрос большой. Так всегда было, в общем-то. Поэтому здесь мы с вами будем рассматривать какие-то конкретные вопросы, какие-то конкретные примеры из жизни. Попытаемся давать комментарии на то, как это могло бы быть с позиции йоги и так далее.
What else should I say? Today is an introductory lecture. It is more about general points. The problem of reproduction, procreation cannot be avoided. If there is an illusion that this can be done, then this cannot be done. Of course, it is clear that not every couple in this world has children, but there are other possibilities to promote procreation, help others, for example. There are different options. But if we declare strictly that we are against the continuation of a generation, we hate people, we do not want the human race to continue, then why do we need a human body at all? You need to be as respectful as possible to this topic, because someone once gave us this human body. If we didn't have it, there would be no reason for this declaration that I hate people. And who hates? Hate you can say only if a person already has this human body. At least from this position is stupid. Therefore, you will have to respect this topic. This is the most correct strategy. I will say right away that you cannot get around it, but you can work with it. We must be aware of how much we play with it. It often happens that when we work on ourselves in yoga, we have some kind of pranic resource, in our opinion, excessive. There arises a certain pride that I am such a great yogi, and all that I have gained I will keep 12 years as a brahmachari, I will fly through the air. And this, of course, is a wonderful, but it also has its own protective mechanism. It is not necessary to think that everything is done in such a way that as soon as we have reached a certain level, then the whole body, mind, and all other structures begin to obey us according just to our will and desire. There is not such a thing. Our body, our mind, all the internal structures that are responsible for the continuation of life, if I may say so, are much smarter than we think. That is, there are certain mechanisms that turn on when such behavior also take place. Therefore, you can hear as many tales as you like that the great yogi ascetic lived in a cave, did not bother about anything, flew through the air because caused rain, and then he suddenly met a beautiful woman, and his whole sadhana came unraveled. He began to hit on her, he'd be jealous, and so on. This is normal. This is absolutely normal. This topic is the most difficult of all that can be imagined. The number of all sorts of possible options and combination of how it can be unlimited may be anything, but there are some specific patterns that you can work with and do something. I don't pretend to help resolve problems for everyone. I'm not a family psychologist at all. Moreover, I personally do not give any advice. By the way, please send no-name questions anonymously. I will not voice names and give personal advice. It will be all impersonal and in the format how this happens in yoga, and for ordinary people, probably, well, there are such and such options and why. The most important thing is to figure out why. Why am I doing this? I repeat again, in order that perhaps if you have already reached the point in your practice that you really have this pranic success, you want to direct it to solving unsolved problems in the sphere of relations between men and women, then slowly begin to take this out of the blind zone, to spend this excess a little there, to slightly loosen cliches, established stereotypes, and possibly not to make those mistakes that we would be guaranteed to make if we did not have this knowledge. At least a chance appears. Where do all problems begin as a rule? The first need of mature person is to find the opposite sex person. I'm lonely, I need a girl, I need a boyfriend, and things just kind of happen. Most likely this is because first person who we met, it is simplest tragedy from the lives of in animal bodies. Because animals live like that. Animals as a rule do not choose a partner. The bull does not choose a smarty cow as a rule. If they are on the same farm, then they are approximately equally fed and equally healthy. The first one he meets becomes the mother of his children. Similarly, the first man who is ready to impregnate you becomes the father of your children. This cliche in particular are embedded in us. We have been dragging them since the days of life in the bodies of animals. Therefore, the very first strategy is primitive. Now, I will say it rather rudely and perhaps inappropriately, but please notice, usually people say that brains become adequate by the age of 30, if not later. Before that, we are gaining some kind of experience we can interpret it and be smart. A person usually becomes sexually mature by the age of 16, although someone later, someone earlier. This is such a delta of at the age of 15. Not bad, right? Where do we start? We start with what is simpler. What's easier? Millions of lives accumulated in the bodies of animals and those scenarios of behavior. So the first and we got who suited more or less for some parameters there that as a rule becomes our first love. Of course, it seems to us that this is the highest love, that this is it. The heavens have opened, he or she is the one we were waiting for.
Это миллионы жизней, накопленные в телах животных, и те сценарии поведения. Соответственно, первый, кто нарисовался и более-менее по каким-то там параметрам подошел, тот, как правило, и становится нашим первым возлюбленным, первой возлюбленной. Разумеется, нам кажется, что это высшая влюбленность, что вот оно открылось, небеса разверзлись, и пришла именно та, кого мы ждали. Но только спросите тех, кто так говорил в 15 лет, 40,
But just ask those who said at the age of 15, later at the age of 45. Was this true or an illusion? I think that about 80%, most likely, I will not lie, they will say that it was a mistake of youth, as rule so. 15-year-old people do not listen to 40-year-old. You're right. If youth knew and if old age could, this is typical. There are a lot of such sayings. I really love folk wisdom. It gives very good humor in this regard. We are talking about typical scenarios which usually happen, so that's all. Further, life goes on according to the same scenario. If we get caught early, we either break up or tolerate each other or something else happens, but we are no longer up to choosing. Another scenario when a person constantly chooses under the influence of fashionable glossy magazines, searches for a guy with a six-pack and then chooses who has the most terrific stomach muscle from the whole gym. There are many guys. Forgive me my humor, please. Or something else there. For example, one more scenario, a mother from childhood compelled her daughter to look for a smarty boy, and now the girl chooses the smartest in the class, then the smartest at the institute, then it turns out that at work she can find even smarter. That's how it all happens for some time, and then bang, you are 30 years old, then 35, then 40, it is too late. Then it turns out that we think that we have no more time and the first person we meet becomes a prince, well, or the best of the possible. But in order to at least have the best possible scenario, you need to understand the selection criteria. In the meantime, for most people, the selection criteria are unconscious patterns that are taken from the experience of previous generations. They are not bad. They are not bad since the human race continues. If they were bad or not right, we would die out. Another conversation is that you can get this out of the blind zone and do it more optimally, so to speak. It is possible, but for this you have to work on yourself. Plus, you should work also to ensure that again you don't slip into the very pride that I know exactly how to do all this. You are all wrong here, and I will choose the best of the best by myself. It is also impossible. It is just useless. Why? We will talk about this later. A lot of time has passed. Any questions, comments? Question. I became so offended, and what? In 35 years it is already the end? You have no choice? No, but agree that the choice of 15 years old will be made from peers of classmates at school. At age 15, the choice seems wide because you don't really understand. You have not formed selection criteria. You have a set of hormonal explosions and emotions. Yes, here probably the main thing is to find some middle way and find balance, too smart or too strong, or all of it. One more question. I understand that modern medicine works wonders, but the older woman, the less likely she is to give birth to offspring. I spoke of all, first of all, about this, and not that the chances are reduced. Not at all, I beg you. The chances of not finding a man but a father to children and giving birth to children are reduced. For a woman at 80, you can be sweetie among 90-year-old. This is question of the critical of perception and what we want, a question of the adequacy of choice. There are always a choice. I was struck by the graph on site gapminder.org, a wonderful graph. Who cares? Please Google it. More recently, people lived for 30-40 years. They lived 30-40 years at all. Not that they had children at this age. We plan that at the age of 40 we will do something, but why get pulled somewhere, pushed for something, and we are doing stupid things? Check out gapminder.org site. Just some 200 years ago, most recently people lived only 30-40 years, of course, already at the age of 15. It was necessary to have children. It was justified. Children still need to be raised somehow. Therefore, now we have big changes of the template. We live better, we live longer, we live more satisfying. We need to make not so much effort to get food, plus emancipation, but we will talk about this later. Emancipation is generally a separate thing. Now is a very interesting period in the history of mankind when something will change. This is quite obvious. It is already changing. No one is talking about it, but step by step the male chauvinism begins to regress and crack. Whatever they say, this is happening right now. In the next lecture, we will talk about this. This is really interesting. Now the situation of women is beginning to really align with men. Not only that someone there shouted about this 30 years ago, ran bare-breasted near the government house and so on. We omit this now. I'm not a bit about that. The question is now. Now, woman as rule is able to feed herself and, moreover, even children. Indeed, by the age of 30, they have the appropriate skills to do this. Actually, sometimes a woman works very well. Plus, everyone knows that women are stronger than men, even at the level of psychology. In terms of effectiveness, a woman may be more effective at work than a man. All my life, I take on mandible job while doing yoga at the same time. I see that there are a lot of women on a leadership position. They are not someone's mistresses, they are not someone's relatives, they are women who carry on business, they do a lot of work, they are well paid, they are paid to do their job well. It is happening now. Therefore, to say the women are dependent of men at the moment is not a very large percentage, not the same as before. Therefore, now previous patterns of behavior are breaking. First of all, the male chauvinism, we will discuss it later. We have to finish now. Thanks to everyone for watching. Thanks to everyone who will watch the record. Email your questions to asktantrayoga@gmail.com. I hope that lectures will be regular. Even if I live somewhere, then will be read from the place where I will stay. I will speak about any changes in advance. Thanks to all. Bye.